Okay. Hi. I'm Dr. Brad Katz. I'm not a neurologist. I'm not a headache specialist. I'm an ophthalmologist. And the reason that I was asked to speak to you this evening is because I have a personal interest in some of the ophthalmic manifestations of headache and specifically migraine. Because as you may know, or maybe personally know from personal experience, migraine can have some very significant and disabling visual symptoms. And sometimes those people who have those symptoms end up coming into my clinic because they think there's something wrong with their eyes or the visual part of their brain. And sometimes it turns out to be just a manifestation of migraine. And so like part of my thing, like in teaching residents and medical students and other ophthalmologists, is to recognize what those symptoms are, to recognize that they're migraine and not a more serious, like life-threatening other issue, and to come up with treatments for those things. So I have this little company, Axon Optics, and I'm obligated to tell you that I have a conflict of interest because I have a patent for a technology that's used for the treatment of light sensitivity associated with migraine and other light-sensitive conditions. And so the university recognizes that, and so they have you put together what's called a conflict of interest management plan. And part of that conflict of interest management plan includes me publicly saying, hey, like I have a financial interest in this technology when I give a talk like this. So I just want to talk a little bit about the clinical characteristics about, abnormal light sensitivity. The technical word is photophobia. I'm going to talk a little bit about what causes light sensitivity because I think it's kind of interesting. It's something we've only learned in the last 10 or 20 years. I'm going to talk a little bit about light sensitivity treatment here at the university, and then talk about some new research that's been going on here into the treatment of light sensitivity. So, broadly speaking, photophobia is just abnormal intolerance to light. So it's very common for people with migraine to find either certain kinds of light or certain amounts of light to be uncomfortable. But like somebody who doesn't have migraine does not get it, doesn't see what the problem is or why they're having this intolerance. And so it's not being able to tolerate light that doesn't seem to bug other people. There's a number of eye and brain conditions that can be associated with light sensitivity. But most of these are pretty easily distinguished from migraine because of the other symptoms and signs that they have. And so if you have like a normal eye exam and you've got nothing else going on, somebody who comes into my eye practice with a primary complaint of light sensitivity, like 90% of those people have migraine. 8% of them have this condition called benign essential blepharospasm, which I'll talk about. And then a small proportion of them have traumatic brain injuries. Those people also can have really bad light sensitivity that's very similar to the light sensitivity that people with migraine have. And a lot of those people that have a traumatic brain injury have headaches too that have a lot of characteristics that are like migraine. So you've probably seen somebody with benign essential blepharospasm but not realized what it is. So people with that, they blink frequently and they almost seem uncomfortable, like they're in pain, and they're squeezing their eyes and blinking and like trying to keep their eyes open, and they're just blinking constantly like that. It looks like they have like a facial tic. And it is a movement disorder. It's in the same spectrum as Parkinson's disease. So it's a primary brain problem that causes these people to blink uncontrollably and squeeze their eyelids. It's hard for them to keep their eyes open. And like 100% of people with benign essential blepharospasm also have light sensitivity. And treating the light sensitivity, as you'll see, helps make their spasms better. So migraine is incredibly common. 18% of women, 6% of men have migraine. That's a huge number. There's oftentimes a family history, although in my experience, people don't know about the family history because people are often either misdiagnosed with some other headache syndrome or undiagnosed. And the thing that I think is fascinating is that lots of people lots of adults with migraine have a history of being carsick as children. Some people remain carsick even as adults. And then there's also sometimes people who as children had episodic belly pain, like crampy, gassy, unexplained belly pain. And some people think that's abdominal migraine. in children. So what turns light into a painful stimulus? So we've all had the experience of looking at a light that's too bright, like the sun. It physically hurts. So it's probably a protective mechanism that we share with all animals that have eyes to keep us from damaging our eyes. Because if you look at the sun for too long, it will burn up your retina and you won't be able to see. And so I think it's just in terms of evolution, it's something that's evolved to keep us from damaging our eyes. And in some people, for some reason, that system, which is trying to protect us, is too sensitive and actually ends up hurting us. We actually have a small bevy of patients here at the U who are blind. Like, these are people who are legally blind, they can't drive, they can't read, normal print books, and they have light sensitivity. That's crazy, right? Like, how could you possibly have light sensitivity if you're blind? But the reason is that the vision pathway and the light sensitivity pain pathway are separate. And you can damage the vision system and the vision pathway without damaging the light sensitivity pathway. In fact, in some of these patients, I think the pain pathway gets revved up in the absence of their vision pathway. It turns out that the light sensitivity pathway begins with these cells with this unfortunate name, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. So there are, your eye, if you think of your eye like a camera, it's actually a really good analogy. It has a shutter, it has an aperture, but instead of, it has a lens, but instead of having film in the back of your eye, you have this thing called the retina. And just like camera film, the retina is light sensitive. It's the part of your eye that absorbs light and turns it into an electrical signal that goes to your brain. So you can think of the rest of the eye as functioning to focus light onto the retina so that you can see. So there are some cells in the retina called these IPRGCs that they're fascinating. They were only discovered like about 18 years ago. If you think about, like, when you go, let's say like you travel across the world to Australia, you're all goofed up for the first week, right? You're waking up in the middle of the night, you're going to sleep in the middle of the day, your body's clock is all messed up. But after you've been there about a week, all of a sudden you're kind of in pace with the people that live there, and you're getting up with the sun, you're going to sleep at sunset, and you're eating at the right times, you're hungry at the right times. And it's these cells that do that. So your body has a natural 24-hour clock. If you stick somebody in a cave where they can't tell when the sun comes up and when the sun goes down, you don't give them a watch, you don't give them any way to tell what time it is, their body will naturally adopt a 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking and eating. But if you go to a different time zone, these cells will resynchronize that clock to keep with the time zone. So it's these cells that keep your body synchronized with the sun. And it's these cells that when you travel to another time zone, resynchronize you to the new time zone. They also constrict your pupil. So everybody's seen, like, if you shine a light, well, maybe you haven't. I'm an eye doctor, I look at this all day long. If you shine a light in somebody's eye, their pupil constricts. It's these cells that do that. And these cells also project to pain centers in the brain. And so we're pretty certain that when these cells get too revved up, it causes pain. These cells have nothing to do with vision or seeing. So these cells do not project to parts of the brain that are involved with seeing or vision. They project to these really old parts of your brain that we share with every other vertebrate, fish, amphibians, snakes, all have these same kinds of cells in their eye. They all have a circadian rhythm that keeps them on a 24-hour schedule with the sun. And because of that, it's these really ancient parts of our brains that we share with all other vertebrates that these cells talk to. They don't talk to the visual parts of the brain. This is a complicated slide, but I think it's so important to go over. So a lot of you, let me see can you see my pointer? Yeah. So a lot of you probably know that in your eye you have rods and cones. Rods are these long cells. They're responsible for night vision. And then you have three kinds of cones: blue cones, green cones, and red cones. They're responsible for day vision and color vision. So at night, like if it's really dark, these cells are too insensitive and don't work. You depend on your rods. During the day, when it's bright outside, these cells kind of turn off, and it's these cells that help you see. So these cells project to some other cells in the retina, and then to some other cells in the retina, and then those cells send their axons, their little wires, out through the optic nerve and into the brain. So these little M1 and M2 cells are those intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that I was telling you about. So the rods and the cones talk to these cells, and then these cells talk to these ancient parts of your brain that are involved with the suprachiasmatic nucleus is circadian rhythm entrainment. The OPN is pupillary constriction in the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and then these are pain centers in the brain. But the thing that's trippy about these cells is that they are intrinsically light sensitive. So that means they don't require any input from rods or cones in order to be turned on. And that's very unusual, and that's why they were only discovered like 18 years ago. These cells, if you look at them, look more like an invertebrate photoreceptor, so they look like a light-sensitive cell in a bug or a spider, more so than they do look like a rod or a cone that you see in a human or in a snake or in a fish. So if these cells are wiped out by some disease, these cells still work. They don't allow you to see, but they're light sensitive, and they can cause pupillary constriction, they can keep your circadian rhythm from getting messed up, and they can cause pain. That's why we have blind people who are light sensitive, because if you wipe out these rods and cones, you can't see. But if these cells are still intact and they still work, you can still have pain from light that's too bright. I'm not going to go through this slide. I just think it's really fascinating that when you look at the different proteins in these cells, these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and you look at the genes that are used in those cells, to an evolutionary biologist, they look like an invertebrate photoreceptor. They look like a bug eye. And some evolutionary biologists think that this part of our eye, this part of our retina, is something that's been present all through evolution, all the way back to before there was a division between vertebrates and invertebrates. So these cells have been around with us a long time, way before there were humans. So like I said earlier, I think it's a protective mechanism that's just too sensitive. So it's weird, like this is something that I heard early on in my career and I just didn't get it. It was people coming in complaining about fluorescent lights. Gas discharge lights are the things you see like in Costco or Home Depot or Walmart. They're these crazy bright lights that have kind of an eerie color to them up in the ceiling of those big box stores. Yeah, a lot of people with migraine don't like those. And then computer screens. So there was something, and it wasn't really the how bright the light was that seemed to be annoying to people, because these people in general could go outside with sunglasses and they were fine. It was the nature of the light, it was the character of the light that was somehow annoying to them. And I think this is part of the reason why. So if you look at the wavelengths of light that are emitted by the sun, that's the solar spectrum that's here, it has kind of a nice smooth curve to it, you know, that goes from ultraviolet to visible light, then to infrared. It has a nice smooth curve. And if you look at the sensitivity of the human eye, it's kind of right there in the middle of it. And that makes sense, because you would think that an animal that's evolved under the sun would evolve to have an eye that reacts to the same wavelengths of light, the same colors of light that are emitted by the sun. So it's this really smooth curve. If you then look at the light, that's the wavelengths of light that are emitted by a tungsten light bulb. So that's an old-fashioned, regular, you know, $1 for 4 of them, incandescent light bulb. It has a tungsten filament in it. And it's a burning filament, just like the sun. And as a result, the colors of light that are emitted by those burning filaments follow this nice, smooth, round curve, just like the sensitivity of the eye. But if you look at a fluorescent light, it's really spiky. It emits very strongly at certain wavelengths and then not at all at other wavelengths. And that's represented by this brown bottle, green bottle, blue bottle. Over time, the technology in fluorescent lights has changed a lot to try to make it more like a natural light, more like the sun, more like an incandescent light. But it's just not there. It just does not have that same pleasing quality, especially to somebody with migraine. So I think, again, it's the wavelengths of light that are emitted by the fluorescent lights, the computer screens, the LED lights, the gas discharge lights that bug people with migraine. It's not the intensity of the light. And I've never met a migraine patient who didn't prefer incandescent light to any of those other light sources. Okay, so we move to treatment of light sensitivity. Okay, so you've got somebody that's coming in complaining of fluorescent light sensitivity, the computer screen's driving them crazy. Let's move to treatment. So first is to treat the underlying condition. So if they've got migraine or blepharospasm or traumatic brain injury, try to make those things better. There are no medical treatments for light sensitivity. There's no pill or injection or treatment for that. So I've always thought that optical treatments were easy and inexpensive and logical. You know, something you could put in a pair of glasses or a contact lens. I do encounter sometimes patients their light sensitivity is so profound that they wear sunglasses indoors just so they can go to the store and go to work and stuff. They're so uncomfortable. But the problem is that when you put sunglasses on, you're dark adapting your eye so that when you do take your sunglasses off or when you go outside, the light is even more unbearable than it was before. So you think about what it's like to go to a movie like on a Saturday matinee and you're in this dark theater for a couple hours and you walk outside into the afternoon sun, it's blinding. And that's how it is if you're wearing sunglasses indoors and then you go outside. So I try to discourage people from doing that because I think it actually makes things worse in the long run. So early on in my career, I came across this tint called FL41. The FL is for fluorescent. And it's a tint that's available that's light enough that you can wear it indoors. It seems to make people more comfortable, but it doesn't dark adapt their eye and make them more light sensitive. And it seems to be especially helpful for people with light sensitivity associated with migraine and blepharospasm. I haven't really tested it too much on people with traumatic brain injury just because I don't encounter a lot of those patients in my practice. This is what it looks like. It's sort of a rose-colored tint. That's how it looks like compared to a pair of gray ordinary sunglasses. So if you look at what wavelengths of light are blocked by FL41, I thought this was really interesting. Where's my cursor? So FL41 is the blue line here. And see how there's this little dip right here? So this dip is at about 480 nanometers, and that's sort of a blue-green part of the spectrum. And that turns out to be, FL41 was just discovered by accident. Nobody said, oh, there's these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells and we need to turn those off. Those hadn't even been discovered yet. The way it was discovered, I can't remember if that's the next slide. Yeah, there was this guy, Wilkins, in Birmingham, England, and he had encountered a bunch of patients who were complaining about fluorescent light sensitivity. And so he just took some people that were light sensitive and he tried on all kinds of different colors until he found something that seemed to help the most people, and that was FL41, and FL's for fluorescent. And so he just empirically, just by trial and error, came up with that FL41 tint in 1989. And then a couple years later, this other, I think he's a neurologist in England, tried FL41 out on a bunch of kids who lived in an orphanage who had migraines and found that it seemed to help their migraines. And that was kind of where that FL41 got started. But when I came along, I was kind of curious because one of my colleagues, Dr. Kathleen Diggory, who is a headache specialist, was prescribing this tint for her light-sensitive patients. And it was uncanny, how much it would help people. And I just thought that was weird. So I had a scientist on the main part of campus test FL41. I was like, what's going on with this? And he showed me that it was blocking it was not transmitting light in this kind of blue-green part of the spectrum. And then like within that year at some point, I read about intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. This was like in 2001 or 2002. And I was like, that is not a coincidence. That's why people like FL41, because just by dumb luck, it blocks the very wavelengths of light that turn those cells on. One of the first research projects we did in the early 2000s was with benign essential blepharospasm. You can imagine it's such a debilitating disease. Like, you look like you're crazy. You can't drive a car with your eyes squeezing shut like that. It's a very embarrassing disease kind of to have. People don't understand it. In social situations, it tends to get worse, which of course makes you blink more, which makes you more self-conscious, and it's really horrendous. It's treated with Botox, interestingly. It was one of the first, I think that was the first use of Botox, was to treat blepharospasm, because you can inject it into the eyelids and the brow and just weaken those muscles so they can't contract so forcefully. And it's a miracle cure for these people, because there was nothing for these people before that. Anyway, because so many of those people had complained about light sensitivity, we thought, gee, why don't we try FL41 on them? And so we actually took about like 24 of our patients with blepharospasm, tried FL41 on them, and boy, they really liked it. Now, if you ever go, the Benign Essential Blepharospasm Research Council, Foundation, they have an annual meeting, and it's really patient-centric. Like, patients who have blepharospasm from all over the country come to this meeting to hear the latest research and stuff. If you go to that meeting, man, everybody's wearing FL41. You can spot them in the airport on the way to the meeting. I mean, it's just that effective. And it's not expensive, and it's... we next did a research project with some of the blepharospasm patients and how light sensitivity is impacting their activities of daily living. That was really interesting. And then we did a head-to-head test, because people were kind of doubting Thomas's. They were like, all right, it's just a placebo effect. You're just making the light darker. Any sunglasses would work for this condition. So we're like, okay, so we randomized people to wear either FL41 or some plain gray sunglasses like you could buy at the grocery store without any special prescription or knowledge about light sensitivity. And we found that almost all the blepharospasm patients found FL41 to be more helpful than gray tint. I mean, the gray tint does make things better, but FL41 made things like a lot better. And so there is something kind of magic about blocking that wavelength of light, those wavelengths of light. We actually went so far as to, like, we took patients with blepharospasm, we put little electrodes on their eyelids while they were reading, so we could actually electrically record how frequently people were blinking, how strongly they were blinking, and what the duration of their blinking was. So we could monitor all that stuff with a computer, and then had them wear either FL41, gray, and then we also had like these pink lenses that sort of looked like FL41 but didn't block the same wavelengths, and it was clear that FL41. And so that wasn't just like a questionnaire or something. That was actually like electric recording of muscle activity. So it was completely objective, and that was really the final straw that convinced people that, okay, FL41 really does do something magic. It's not just a placebo effect. And that resulted in this manuscript in 2009. And it was a partnership between ophthalmology and neurology. And so blepharospasm patients, we found, based on our research, really are more light sensitive than people that don't have blepharospasm. They have significant disabilities, that interfere with their activities of daily living, like shopping and working and going to school. And that FL41 seems to make those symptoms better, and we had both subjective proof from our questionnaires and objective proof from our muscle recordings that it really does work. So this is really kind of it took FL41 from being like sort of like a voodoo thing that people were talking about to like, hey, there's some actual science behind this that really does work. It's not a placebo effect. There's some drawbacks of FL41. It's pink. It makes everything you look at pink. It blocks other wavelengths that don't need to be blocked. So You can't make it as dark in the blue-green part of the spectrum as you might like. It's hard, because it's a tint, it's hard to make every lens exactly the same. If you've ever watched, this is not something they teach you in eye doctor school, but if you go into a laboratory where they make glasses, they take a lens blank, it's a piece of glass with a curve to it, and they dip it in a hot dye, and and the guy's like, yep, okay, that's about good, and he takes it out, and it's very, it's not very scientific. The dye can have different concentrations, the bath can be a different temperature, different kinds of plastic lenses take up the tint differently, and so it really depends on the experience and knowledge of the guy or gal working in the lab where they make the glasses. But even the most experienced lab technician can't make two pairs of FL41 look exactly the same. And you can't put it on other surfaces. You can't put it on a contact lens. You can't put it on a computer screen. You can't put it on your windows in your house. It's really only suitable for glasses. So we really were looking for some other technology that would get the job done. So some other way to block those wavelengths without these drawbacks. So I got together with another researcher on the main campus in engineering, and he works with these things called thin films. So thin films are these very ultra thin layers of metal that can be applied to a glass or plastic surface that have all kinds of cool optical qualities. So anti-reflective coatings that most people nowadays get on their prescription glasses are actually made out of thin films. If you ever see somebody with mirrored sunglasses, that's a thin film. So these thin films, depending on what metal you're using and how you layer it, can do all kinds of crazy things. And you can actually use this technology to block 480, the wavelength that these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, There's a way to block that using thin films. And this is what we came up with. The pair on your left blocks 620 nanometers, which is more of an orangey color, and you can kind of see the orangey reflection. Whereas the glasses on your right block more of a blue part of the spectrum. You can see the blue reflection. They work by reflecting the light. A tint works by absorbing the wavelengths of light that you don't want. A thin film works by reflecting them away. This is an example of some different metals that are used in these thin films. This top one is magnesium fluoride, silicon dioxide, titanium dioxide, and these can be, and then their thicknesses are in nanometers. These are ultra thin layers of these metal oxides. And there's little formulas you can use to figure out, okay, what metals do I use, what order do I put them in, how thick do I make the layer, in order to get all these different optical properties like anti-reflective coatings, mirrored sunglasses, or a filter that blocks a wavelength I don't want. So what you can get, we actually have developed two different kinds of notches, one at 480 and one at 620. And again, this is sort of to show you what colors kind of correspond to those different wavelengths. So 480 is right about here. That's sort of a bluish color. So we've got a filter that blocks there. And then we've got this other filter that blocks at 620, which is more of an orangey color. Without going too far into the weeds, the reason that we chose those two wavelengths is the pigment in the melanopsin cells, the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, it's strange. And again, it's like the photopigment you find in a bug. It flips back and forth between these two wavelengths, 480 and 620. And so we made filters for both of those wavelengths because we thought they might both be effective. We then designed a research trial where we randomized, I think it was 40 people with migraine. They filled out a set of questionnaires, then they didn't wear any glasses for 4 weeks. Then they filled out another set of questionnaires, and then they were randomized to either wear the 480 or the 620 lens. Those are these two. Then they had a 4-week period, or no, a 2-week period where they didn't wear any lenses. They filled out more questionnaires. Then they were flipped to wear the other lens. And then they filled out a 5th questionnaire. Then they took the glasses off and did a 6th questionnaire. It's kind of complicated. It's called a double crossover. It's where every patient in the study is randomized to do both things, but in a different order. So some people wore 620 first and then wore 480, and some people wore 480 and then 620. And what we found, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the HIT-6, that's a headache impact test. It's a 6-question questionnaire that's used by a lot of headache specialists to tell whether or not how your headaches are doing over the last few weeks. And the scores, I think, range from like 36 to 72. And so at baseline, the average of all of our patients, all those 40 patients, their average HIT-6 score was 65.2, which is a pretty high score. When they were wearing either the 480 or the 620, their scores dropped by about 4 points. When they did the washout between glasses, their scores jumped back up. When they flipped to wearing the other glasses, their scores went back down. And then when they took the glasses off for 2 weeks at the end, their scores went almost all the way back up to where they were to begin with. And so we thought this was good evidence that both 480 and the 620 filter can make not just people's light sensitivity better, but make their headaches less, make their headaches better. We just completed this study where we wanted to get permission from the FDA to say, like, this is a treatment for migraine, but in order to do that, they wanted some very specific evidence, and so we did another trial where patients were randomized to either wear a plain gray lens or the 480 lens. And so the gray lens blocked all colors of light equally, but at a lower amount, whereas the 480 lens just blocked 480 in the blue part of the spectrum. And we were looking for any evidence that we could reduce the frequency, severity, or impact of headaches. And we did it at 6 different sites. We didn't actually get to a 7th site. And in order to be in the study, you had to meet criteria for chronic migraine. Your glasses couldn't be too strong. You couldn't have other eye diseases. And what we found was that we were able to markedly reduce headache frequency in just a 3-month study by having people wear these filters. And so it's not a cure for migraine. It's an adjunct, to the other treatments that people use. I would never recommend that somebody just wear glasses like to make their migraines better. But if you're somebody with migraines and light sensitivity is part of either your symptoms or one of your triggers, like, it's a really easy, safe, inexpensive way to make your headaches less annoying, more tolerable, less frequent. And I'm hoping that, with this thin film technology, that we could develop things that could go over your computer screen, or things you could put on your car windshield, or things that could go on a contact lens. It has more applications than the FL41 tint did, and that's kind of where I'm going next. And I think that's the end. So I hope that was helpful. It's a little bit into the weeds, and I apologize for that, but I hope it was helpful. The thin film technology is not yet commercially available. I hope it will be soon. FL41 is definitely commercially available. I usually send my patients who want it to the Moran optical shop. So the Moran Eye Center at the university has an optical shop, and they sell FL41. They can put it onto just about any pair of glasses. They actually have figured out a way to put it on a contact lens, which is kind of cool. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. And then my company, the reason I founded my company, Axon Optics, originally was because I was getting calls from people all over the world, where can I get FL41? And they didn't live in Salt Lake City. And I was like, well, I'll just make a little internet company. I'll just sell it on the internet. And so that's what I do. So I don't even send my own patients to my own company, because I think you get better service going to an optical shop. But for the people that live away from Salt Lake City, you can't like walk into an optical shop in Chicago and say, hey, I want FL41. They won't know what you're talking about. It's just not, even though it's not like any big secret or anything, it's just not, people aren't aware of it. It's just not readily available. So that's why I made it available on the internet. And I've also been working with my company to, instead of having a technician dip the the clear plastic lens in a dye. We've worked with manufacturers to make the dye intrinsic in the plastic that the lens is cast from, so that every lens comes out exactly the same color, exactly the same darkness, and that's been really helpful too.
So when you send, is it the dye that you send and they do it there, or is it that they send?
No, we send finished glasses, like you send in your prescription, and we've got frames, and yeah, it's like buying glasses online.
Okay.
So this is different than some places advertise like glasses that help you not get headaches from computer screens. This is different because this is very specific. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, those blue blocking lenses that you see, like for computer screens, I actually, just out of curiosity, they're not on this pair of glasses, but my glasses that I wear at work have that coating on them, and it doesn't do anything.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's bogus. It looks cool,
Okay.
and it's a thin film, but it doesn't, I don't find it helpful.
Okay.
Do we get questions off the internet?
I haven't received any yet.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So when you did the trial with the blue and the other lens,
The gray lens,
those were both blocking, not absorbing.
The gray tint was absorbing, and the thin film was reflecting. They were different. They were the same darkness.
On the double study.
Oh, on the double study, the first study, yes, those are both reflecting.
Okay.
Yes.
So on that one particular one, the blue one, I'm just wondering, why isn't there a tint, like, instead of the pink, but more like the blue, I guess?
Mhm.
Like, to absorb?
Well, I'm actually working on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're spot on. Because the thin films are a bit expensive to manufacture, and tints are really cheap, and that's something we're working on right now, is a way, exactly what you said, a way to absorb those wavelengths, not be pink,
Right.
and not be a thin film. Yeah. Yeah, cool. And I hope, again, I hope there'll be something available soon. I was just going to show you really quick in something in the oh, for heaven's sake, everybody's keyboard's different. So this is my little company, Axon Optics. And we actually, again, this has nothing to do with light sensitivity, but we just came up with this supplement. I have no idea why the cursor will not. But I'm kind of jazzed about it. I'm actually taking it myself. So we're selling it on Amazon. It's called Axon Supplement. We just came out with it within the last couple of months. Oh my God, this computer is just so annoying. Not this one. Oh. That one. So this is it's a drink supplement. It's a combination of magnesium, coenzyme Q10, vitamin B2, and butterbur. So these are things that these are natural things that have all been shown to help with migraines, but nobody's ever thought of putting them all together, and I really didn't know why. So I don't have any scientific evidence that this drink mix is effective. But there is evidence that magnesium is effective, and that B2 is effective, and that coenzyme Q10 is effective, and that butterbur, which is a flower, is effective. And so we're like, why not just put them all together? So. And also dehydration is a migraine trigger, so We made it a drink supplement. It doesn't taste great. It's okay. We're working on the flavor. We're going to try to boost the amount of magnesium. We're just throwing it out there to see if people like it.
Do you get migraines?
I do, yeah. Not chronic migraine, but episode, like once a week kind of migraines. And so I've been drinking this every morning to try to make my headaches better.
And does it work?
I think it does. I think it works great. But like,
For how long?
a day, yeah. I think everybody's different, you know? There's nothing in here that you're going to overdose on. You could probably drink it more than once a day. But I'm excited about it, so maybe it's a placebo effect. I don't know. But like I've had and my wife and I both had instances where like I'm starting to get a headache coming on and I speedy quick chug-a-lug, 12 ounces of this, and it seems to make the headache go away. I don't know. And it's not expensive. And actually, I'll give you a coupon. So if you write friend of, don't spread this around. If you write friend of Katz, K-A-T-Z, you get a nice discount. That's my self-serving, self-promoting Axon supplement. Any other questions? Well, thanks for coming tonight.